Turn the fans on. It was getting a little warm in here. If we'd have came last week, we probably wouldn't have had to turn the fans on. My name is Pastor Al, and I have the honor today of leading the celebration that we're going to hold for Carol. We're calling it a celebration because he'd be really ticked if we called it a funeral, because that's just not his thing. But I have to believe that he would be very pleased when he's seen all of your faces here to honor him. Because we're honoring Carol, I thought I would go through and tell you what we're going to do today, because he was not the kind of guy that didn't like to know what was going on. So over the next few minutes, we're going to remember Carol's roots, his contributions, and we're going to hear from his family and his friends. We're also going to honor his service to his country and his military career with a ceremony. On behalf of Nancy and Jeff, I want to start by thanking each and every one of you for coming here today. To Nancy and Jeff and the entire family, I want to express my sympathy for your loss and acknowledge the pain of losing Carol. His memory will live on. But the Bible says that there's a time to mourn, and that time is now. We gather today to honor and remember the life and impact of Carol Sexton. He was born on August 29th, 1933, in South Boardman. He was the son of Carol and Nettie Sexton. Carol grew up most of his life in Godwin Heights and then later in Byron Center. His life was marked by his sense of civic duty, his tough, determined perspective, and the impact that he had on everyone that he came to know well. He had a no-nonsense perspective on life. He was the kind of guy that, you know, he was your friend and he was there if he needed you or if you needed him. But he expected you to take care of your own business, just like he did his entire life. And oh, I should mention, he loved to have fun. And if there isn't a few giggles and some smiles in here today, we will have disappointed Carol. I see that smile back there. That's the kind of smile he'd be looking for. Ear to ear, lots of joy. He had a very distinguished military career that was marked by time and battle. He'd seen some pretty rough stuff in his life. He was a Marine's Marine. He was the kind of guy that if you had a problem, you wanted in your corner. If you had a conflict, he was the guy that you wanted help from. And oh, did I mention, if you wanted a party, he was the guy you wanted with you, because he knew how to have a good time. He carried that joy for life and responsibility all through his life. And we all in this country owe him a debt of gratitude for the sacrifices that he made in his personal life to fight for his country and for those who couldn't fight for themselves. He married Barbara Chapin on September 25th, 1954, who passed in 2005. And together they had a son, Terry, who passed in 1990, and a daughter, Nancy, who, along with her husband, Jeff, have spent the last 13 years living together with Carol in the log house up on the hill. Carol, or Coke as he was known to many, had the ability to make people like him simply because you were in the same room with him. I came to know him through his daughter, and I met him several times, and we never really had any deep philosophical conversations. But every time I left, I just thought to myself, I like that guy. He's a good guy. I remember the times when I would come up here to visit, and we would be sitting around in the kitchen just talking, and every single time, Carol would appear. He'd come up from downstairs and just hang out for a little while. I thought it was because I was a good guy to be around, and I found out later it's because he thought I was hilarious. And if he thought there was a chance to laugh, that's where he was going to be. He was always there when the time of need came, and you could count on him. He never missed a chance to be together with family and friends. If you were in the hospital, you could be in a hospital in Grand Rapids. He would jump in his vehicle and drive down to see you. He never missed a chance to go to a funeral, although it wasn't his favorite thing to do, because he wanted to honor the person. He took his responsibilities seriously. And oh, did I mention he liked to have fun? He liked to laugh. He had a twinkle in his eye when he smiled. You could see the joy. He will be missed. At this time, I'd like to call up Mike Cox, a dear friend, who has a few words to say. Maybe more than a few.
You already stole some of my noise. What am I going to do? And I'm going to have to contradict you. I'm sorry. It is foolish and wrong to mourn over the men who died. Rather, we should thank God that they lived. General George Patton. Carol was my friend, who was not a lifelong friend, kind of one of those later in life friends. As Al said, he was born in South Boardman, but he was raised in Grand Rapids. And he grew up down there working on farms, going to school. And when he was a little boy, he couldn't pronounce his R's. So when he said his name, it came out Coco. And then somehow that got changed to Coke. And he was kind of an adventurous soul. Oh, somebody knows. So this going to school, working on farms was a little bit dull. Plus, he had 3 older sisters, and he said it was hard to be around all those women. So he was off for greener pastures. He ran away from home, not once, but twice. Eventually landing in a lumber camp in Oregon. But his folks had called the police, so back home he came. And he still needed to fulfill that adventurous nature. So he decided to become a Marine at the age of 17. His folks weren't too happy with that. Yeah, mostly his mom wasn't too happy with that. But she knew he was going to continue to run away, and he would, be a problem. So she signed the papers, and off he went to the Marines. And once in the Marine Corps, after boot camp, he was shipped to Korea, and he was in the infamous Chosin Reservoir battle in Korea. And while serving there, he lost 2 of his toes to frostbite, as did many of our men in that conflict. And then he was back home to the States and Michigan, where he met the love of his life, as Al mentioned, Barbara Chapin. And she was from a large family. They all welcomed him in. And as Al mentioned, they were married in I told you to stole all my stuff. They were married in 1954. And then they were off to California, where his son, Terrence Scott Sexton, was born. And out in California, Carol was a drill instructor at Camp Pendleton. And they spent a few years there at Oceanside and 29 Palms. And then they made their way back to Grand Rapids, Michigan, where Nancy Lynn Sexton was born. Then there was a move to Port Huron, and Carol was a recruiting officer there. And then he was off to Vietnam. And his helicopter was shot down there. He sustained his shoulder injury. But he didn't come home with that. He stayed there a few more years. And upon his return home, the family made a move to Memphis, Tennessee, where he retired after 20 years in the Marine Corps. Carol loved serving, not just his Marine Corps service. He was active in Boardman Township, and he served at the county level as well. Most recently, he was the chairman of Kalkaska Public Transit Authority Board. And that, the county level service is really how I met Carol. We were both elected to the Board of Commissioners in 2000. And I really didn't know him at that time. But he got a hold of me before the first meeting, which was our organizational meeting. And he said, I was talking to Elwin Hall, and Elwin said, you should be the chairperson, so that's what we're doing. And that was Carol. That was my introduction. He was a real decisive kind of guy. And then as time went on, we got to know each other, and we kind of adjourned to the VFW for drinks, and, Carol. So we talked a lot, and I learned a lot about Carol, that he'd been a Marine. And when I say that, I do not mean that he joined the Marines. I mean, he was a Marine. He was a forever Marine. And he'd served in 2 wars, Korea and Vietnam. He'd been wounded in service to our country. And he was proud to have served. And he did not mind that he'd been wounded. We were sitting in a Board of Commissioners meeting one day. We were in session. He's sitting to my left and kind of leans into me and said, could we take a break? And I glanced over, and he's bleeding. And he had shrapnel from an old wound working its way out of his body after all those years. So we took a break. But a lot of men would have got up and left the room over that. Just go take care of themselves. Carol wasn't like that. He had this sense of propriety. He was going to do things the way that he thought was proper. He didn't care if it delayed relief for him. It's just the way it was. And I always thought that Carol was a hero, too. Not because he'd served in 2 wars, but he always acted boldly in his civilian life as well. I heard a story about him coming to the rescue of a police officer that pulled someone over, and they were being beaten by the side of the road. And Carol pulled up on this police stop, saw what was going on, jumped out and went to the officer's rescue, beat the guy into submission. So I know that it sounds like Carol was this larger-than-life, tough guy, a warrior. He was. But he was a family man. He talked to me about his family often. He loved the women in his family. He adored them, I think. His mom, Nettie, wife, Barb, Nancy. Carol was at the house one time, and I'd baked pumpkin bread, and I sent some home with him. And apparently he shared it with Nettie, because the next thing you know, I have a note in the mail saying, if that's not some big family secret, I'd like the recipe. So I sent it to her, of course. And then Barb was Carol's rock, I think. And she kept him on the straight and narrow, much as anyone could. Carol and I were having a disagreement one time over county business. Wasn't any big thing. But apparently he went home and talked to Barb, because he called me up shortly thereafter and said, well, I was talking to Barb about it, and she said you were right. So, but he was big that way. He would. And then his daughter, Nancy, Carol was so happy when Nancy moved home. And then Nancy and Jeff decided to marry, and couldn't find anybody to do the ceremony just the way they wanted it done. And Carol called me up, said, would you mind performing the service? I said, I was honored to be asked. I was glad to do that. Occasionally, Carol would talk to me about his son, Terry. That is one of the few times that I ever saw tears in that man's eyes. And, you know, Carol was kind of a ladies' man. Oh, you do know. But he was a chivalrous sort. He opened doors for the ladies. He'd pull out their chair for them to be seated. And interestingly, he believed in equal pay for women long before that was a mainstream notion. So, Carol served his country. He served his community. He served his family. I call him a man's man. He was a family man. He was a good man. Not a perfect man. But he was as good as any man I have ever known. He was my friend. I'm going to miss him, along with all of you.
Sorry about taking some of your stuff there. But I think he's worth it. We can say it 2 or 3 more times if we need to. At this time, Nancy's asked some family and friends to come up, and is Ray here? Ray, if you'll come forward.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ray Thompson, and I know a lot of you here in this room, and some of you I haven't had the pleasure to meet yet, but I'm here today to celebrate the life of someone who I consider to be a mentor in my life and a valued friend as well. Someone who saw something in me at a time maybe when I needed a right push in the right direction, and someone who is responsible for me joining the Marine Corps and becoming a Marine. I thought long and hard about what I should say today, and I really couldn't find the words, especially when you have such great speakers and such great people here today to celebrate his life, to say so many great things. What else could I possibly say? And then I got to thinking about some advice I got from Coke before I left from boot camp. He told me, no matter what you do, whatever you say, you better keep it short and to the point. So I thought today I would keep with that tradition. Seemed rather fitting. So I'm just going to leave you all with this. The Marines hymn, the final verse. The Army or the Navy ever look on heaven's scenes, they will find the streets are guarded by United States Marines. Well, heaven's very lucky to have you on patrol up there, Gunny. And I got to say, there's probably some unfortunate Lance Corporal up there who got dressed down for not having his buckle shined or maybe having his hands in his pockets. But you made a huge impact while you were down here on many of us here today, and definitely myself. You'll be greatly missed, and you'll be fondly remembered. Semper Fidelis.
Note to self, keep your hands out of your pocket. Gail?
I have the honor of reading this on behalf of Sergeant Glenn Michael Doss of the United States Marine Corps. Gunnery Sergeant Carol Sexton was one of the greatest men I have known. Growing up, there were two people whose approval I sought, my grandfather Glenn and my grandfather's best friend Carol. He was as close to an uncle as he could be. Carol was my family. He promised my grandpa that he would watch over my mom and me, and he did just that. I knew from age 5 years old that all I wanted was to be a Marine like them. As I went through life, I slowly started to realize that I didn't have to strive to make him proud. He was proud of me no matter what. When I enlisted, Carol went and talked to my recruiter. Like Carol, when he enlisted, I was not old enough. My mom had to sign permission for me to join, and Carol had to lie about his age to be able to be shipped out to the Korean War. We were both 17. Carol went several times into my recruiter's office to make sure I got the MOS I wanted. He had to make sure everything was taken care of, and I would be able to follow him in my papa's footsteps. Of course, they pay attention once he said he was a gunny. Being like the both of them was all I ever wanted. When my grandpa Glenn passed away, Carol sat outside his hospital room on and off for days just to make sure we were okay. He never walked into the room because we Marines don't want to remember our brothers that way, much less our best friend. My grandfather did not get to see me become what I had always wanted to become, like my two heroes, but Carol did. 2 days before I left for boot camp, Carol and Nancy came down to see me off. He gave me last-minute advice and told me how proud my papa would be of me when I graduated boot camp. Carol was more excited than I was. Every time I came home, he was eager to hear about all my adventures in the Marine Corps. He was more eager to hear it than I was to tell him. He was more excited than I was when I got married to my wife, Chelsea. Carol has been my #1 supporter through this thing called life since my grandpa passed away. I will continue to make you proud and thank you. Your and your grandpa's daughters will be fine. They were raised by Marines. You kept your promise. Don't worry. They have Marine blood in them. In death there is life. We just found out that I will be a dad. My child would know of you and everything you taught me. He will know the hero you are, and my grandpa will live on through him. The world lost a truly one-of-a-kind man, Carol, and I know you're up there having a drink with Papa, watching over all of us down here with a tear in your eye and a smile on your face. I love you. I always will. Rest easy. We'll take it from here. Until Valhalla, Semper Fi.
Greta.
Well, those are tough acts to follow. And I'm a girl, but I have a big mouth. Thanks for asking. As neighbors, friends, and South Boardman residents, our family will always be grateful for the time and the resources that Carol provided to American Legion Post 463, to the Boardman area senior citizens, and for his work in the township to make our community look better. The blue and red stripe on our white Legion Hall attests to his patriotism. But painting the tank provided him the liberty, if you will, to embellish it with his beloved USMC stencils. It was red, white, and blue all the way, even as to the flowers in our cemetery. There's another story there. We won't go into it. Carol didn't hesitate to acknowledge the efforts of others. He knew how to say thank you. Carol was a frequent occupant of what I call the table of knowledge during morning coffee at the country store. I'm thinking he also had a favorite dessert item from the menu at Yankee Boy. His absence is palpable. It's difficult in today's world to engage our younger veterans in our service organizations. Carol set an exemplary standard that should be followed by all citizens in their organizations and in their communities. Thank you.
I never got a chance to sit at that table of knowledge. Kind of feel like I must have missed out on something. I think you can hear from these stories that the Carol that you came to know and came to honor today was the same to everybody who knew him. He was not a person who showed up and had different versions depending on what was going on. You had to bend to what he was doing because he was going to do Carol. That's what he was going to do. This celebration would not be complete without hearing from his daughter. And because of the emotional nature of the day, she's written down her comments and she's asked me to read them. From Nancy to her dad. How do I describe a man like my father? He had a personality bigger than life. He could be hot-headed and stubborn, but he was also kind, caring, and above all, he was always a gentleman. He was always and will always be my rock, my hero, and he always had my back. My mother would always say, "Nancy, you're just like your father," or like father, like daughter. When I was a little girl, one of my favorite things to do with my dad was to run errands with him. Going to the hardware store or out to the dump, although I can't imagine why I like going to the dump, but I did. Anything to be hanging out with Dad. I must say, though, that probably the place I liked going with him the most was to his friend Lynn Flannery's farm. Lynn had a dairy farm, and of course I loved seeing all the animals, but I also loved to listen to my dad and Lynn have a conversation. Boy, because those guys could swear. I never heard anything like this in my life. I was just mesmerized. Of course, another fond memory is when Dad taught me to drive. Out on the country roads in Byron Center was when I was practicing driving, and I was going down the road, and Dad said, "Okay, Nancy, there's a curve coming up. It's time to slow down." "Okay, Nancy, there's a curve coming up, and you need to slow down." I said, "Slow down!" as he grabbed the wheel out of my hands and kept us from going in the ditch and having a crash. What can I say? I must have inherited his heavy foot. Like father, like daughter. Mom, I think you might have had that right. We had many, many more great memories and good times together. After I moved to California, my parents would come out to visit me, and sometimes my dad would come out by himself when he was driving truck. He enjoyed meeting my friends and partying with me. I never thought as an adult I would be partying with my parent, but he loved to have a good time. When my mother got sick with cancer, I came home to help my dad take care of her along with my aging grandmother who lived downstairs. Both passed away only a month apart. After that, I couldn't leave my dad and go back to California. So I decided to permanently move back to Michigan. And after being back in Michigan, my father and I formed, once again, that very close bond. So one afternoon while Dad and I were cleaning out the garage, Dad says, "I'm hungry." And I thought, me too. But I don't want to go dressed in sweatpants, an iRobot t-shirt with no makeup. I even had cobwebs in my hair. Dad says, "We can always go to the VFW in Kalkaska. It's burger night." I thought to myself, I guess I can go there looking like this. No slight of anybody who goes to burger night, by the way. Well, little did I know that I would meet my future husband that night looking like I did. My dad introduced us, never thinking that we would start dating. After all, Jeff was his drinking buddy, not a person of interest for his daughter. Jeff was cooking burgers that night, and it was love at first sight. I believe for both of us. It must have been if you had cobwebs in your hair and he had grease on his face from the burgers. Definitely not what my dad had in mind. Well, as time went on, there were many trials and tribulations between the three of us. Like the time Jeff picked me up to take me out on a date on his Harley. As I was putting on the helmet, I saw my dad talking very close to Jeff. Many of you probably know what he said already, but I'll tell you what she wrote. I found out later that my dad said to Jeff, "You better be careful with her. If anything happens to her, please do not forget, I am not afraid to kill a man." And yet he hung in there. It was probably the slowest ride I ever had. But ultimately things worked out, and we had many, many more fun times at the VFW. Cobwebs optional. As time went on, Dad and Jeff became very close, especially through his cancer treatments. My dad would say to me, "You were right, Nancy. Jeff is a good man." It wasn't always easy for me to live with two former Marines that were overprotective of me. But we worked things out, and we became a family. I loved it when my dad would refer to both of us as his kids. Also, I can't say enough how grateful I am to have gone on that trip out west with my dad 2 years ago. He got to cross off his bucket list seeing Little Bighorn in Montana, along with all the fun we had in Moab, Utah, seeing the Arches National Park in Tombstone, Arizona, and Santa Fe, New Mexico. Our life will not be the same without my dad with us. There'll be a big hole in our hearts, but he will always live on in our memories of him. The one constant thing in life is change, and we all must move on with our lives. My dad wouldn't want it any other way. I will miss you, my dear Pops. Your loving daughter, Nancy. I think you can hear from her comments that her dad was more than just a dad. He was a friend. At this time, we'd like to ask you to watch with us this video tribute.
painted red. The stripe was white. It was 18 feet from the bow to the stern line. Second hand from a dealer in Atlanta. I rode up with Daddy when he went there to get her. Put on a shine, put on a motor, built out of love, made for the water. Ran her for years till the transom got rotten. A piece of my childhood that'll never be forgotten. It was just an old plywood boat, the 75 Johnson with electric choke. A young boy, 2 hands on the wheel. I can't replace the way it made me feel. And I would turn her sharp and I'd make it whine. He'd say, you can't beat the way an old wood boat rides. Just a little lake across the Alabama line, but I was king of the ocean when Daddy let me drive. Just an old half-ton short bed Ford my uncle bought new in '64. Daddy got it right 'cause the engine was smoking, couple of burnt valves, and he had it going. He'd let me drive her, and we'd haul off a load down a dirt strip where we'd dump trash off a thick tin road. I'd sit up in the seat and stretch my feet out to the pedals, smiling like a hero that just received his medal. It was just an old hand-me-down Ford with 3-speed on the column and a dent in the door. A young boy, 2 hands on the wheel. I can't replace the way it made me feel. And I would press that clutch and I'd keep it right. And he'd say, a little slower, son, you're doing just fine. Just a dirt road with trash on each side, but I was merry and ready when Daddy let me drive. I'm grown up now, 3 daughters of my own. I let them drive my old Jeep across the pasture at our home. Maybe one day they'll reach back in their file and pull out that old memory and think of me and smile and say, it's just an old worn-out Jeep, rusty old floorboards, hot on my feet. A young girl, 2 hands on the wheel. I can't replace the way it made me feel. And he'd say, turn it left and steer it right. Straighten up, girl, now you're doing just fine. Just a little valley by the river where we'd ride, but I was high on a mountain when Daddy let me drive. Daddy let me drive. Oh, he let me drive. She's just an old plywood boat with a 75 Johnson with electric choke. I was a highwayman. Along the coach roads I did ride, with sword and pistol by my side. Many a young maid lost her baubles to my trade. Many a soldier shed his lifeblood on my blade. The bastards hung me in the spring of '25, but I am still alive. I was a sailor, I was born upon the tide. With the sea I did abide. I sailed a schooner around the Horn of Mexico. I went aloft to furl the main
I was a dam builder across the river deep and wide, where steel and water did collide. A place called Boulder on the wild Colorado. I slipped and fell into the wet concrete below. They buried me in that great tomb that knows no sound, but I am still around. I'll always be around, around, and around, and around. I fly a starship across the universe divide, and when I reach the other side, I'll find a place to rest my spirit if I can. Perhaps I may become a highwayman again, or I may simply be a single drop of rain, but I will remain. I'll be back again and again and again and again and again and again.
This song goes out to the men and women who exemplify the words honor, courage, and commitment. They are the few. They are the proud. They are the United States Marines. Semper Fi, my brothers and sisters. Semper Fi. From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, we fight our country's battles in the air, on land and sea. First to fight for right and freedom, and to keep our honor clean. We are proud to claim the title of United States Marine.
can be seated for a second.
As we close today, I'd like to leave you with just a few thoughts, a quick prayer, and then some instructions about how we're going to leave the room today. In a world that is so captivated by our differences and a victim's mentality, I think the challenge to be more like Carol is just what we need. If the impact that Carol has had on your life is to encourage you to love just a little more openly, to own your own lives and persevere when things get tough, to be ready to lend a hand to a friend in need, and to laugh a little more freely, well, then I'm confident that Carol would be pleased. Would you pray with me? Father, I just thank you for all the seeds of greatness that you put in your son, Carol. Lord, and I thank you for each and every life that he had an opportunity to touch. And we know that our next breath is a gift from you and not guaranteed. So God, as we leave this place, may each breath that we take in some way enrich the lives of someone else. And may we find joy in all that you've created. Give us comfort in our time of sorrow. In Jesus' name, amen. As you prepare to leave tonight, we are going to release from the back of the room to the front, so please stay seated until your row is released. I want to remind you that we have a luncheon at the American Legion Hall in Fife Lake, the address of which is on the back of today's program. It is 10283 M186. Thank you for coming.